Hola, I'm Claudia Romo Edelman.
And I'm Cynthia Kleinbaum Milner.
And this is a podcast, a la Latina.
The Playbook to succeed being your authentic self.
Today, we're going to learn from Lori Castillo Martinez a couple of important points.
First, careers are long. Taking a step back won't ruin your success. Even lateral moves can be beneficial.
The importance of references, mentors, and sponsors, and how to maintain those relationships.
Also, the business case for inclusive teams and the correlation between diverse teams and improved performance.
Lastly, you will learn how to approach an interview process to be sure to land in an inclusive environment where you can be yourself.
All of that
And more here, a la Latina.
Stick around.
Hola, welcome to this podcast, a la Latina.
The Playbook to succeed being your authentic self.
Today, Lori Castillo Martinez.
Lori is the Executive Vice President and Chief Equality Officer at Salesforce. She's a board member of How Women Lead and Life Moves, and she's a Senior Fellow at the American Leadership Forum in Silicon Valley.
Welcome, Lori. It's a pleasure having you here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so looking forward to our conversation today.
Okay, so Cynthia and I were we're doing research and trying to prepare for today, and we found actually a lot of information about your corporate roles and about your opinion about the companies that you were representing, but we were not able to find a lot about you. What is that?
Well, it has a lot to do with the career I've chosen. I spent a lot of my career in the compliance and ethics and corporate investigations space. And so before I took the leap into this role of Chief Equality Officer, I actually used to search the internet and make sure I was not on there.
You succeeded. You succeeded.
My team will tell me when I first took on this role, I literally only had about 16 followers, 16. So we have been working on, how we really think about all of the topics related to equality, my own professional career and what I can share and with others. And I think today's podcast is a great opportunity to do that.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
It's literally making the effort to move from invisible to visible. And the reason why we wanted to ask you and start with that is because we think that for a number of Latinas, we don't dare to actually put ourselves out there. We don't want to talk about our stories because we don't think that they're important or we feel exposed. And so because we're trying to elevate the profile of Latinos in general and make sure that Latinas feel comfortable sharing their stories so that they can be seen, heard, and valued, it's interesting to know that you had a career.
She had a reason.
You had a reason.
She had a reason. So let's get the world to know who you are.
All right.
We would love to learn about your upbringing. How did you grow up? Also, can you tell us things from your childhood, from your teenage years that then prepare you for the role that you have now?
So I grew up in San Jose, California. My parents are also from the Bay Area. And I think for me, the two most informative things were, one, I went to an all-girls high school. And when you go to an all-girls high school, you really learn that women rule the world. And that's what I thought when I left high school. It was also a very diverse high school. Many Latinas, Filipinas, just a very diverse environment where I really learned how to be myself. And I was able to sort of center on who I wanted to be. It was a very safe space. All of my friends, I always tell them, if you have daughters, all girls schools I'm a huge fan because I just feel like it brought a different perspective to it. And then sports. I played sports, and again, in an all girls environment, everybody comes to cheer for your sports. It's a little different kind of dynamic. And then I would say the other thing, and really, from a perspective of my family, it was every game, every event, every moment, I had my extended family there. And I think that support, that community engagement, it really just gave me the confidence so that when I went off into the world, whether it was through university or into my first job, I felt that security of family, and I felt that security of team, and just having been in places where I could grow that confidence.
I love that, like having the confidence coming from your family. Like if there's nothing more Latino than extended family going to cheer you up. So.
Oh, yeah.
And having the tios and the tias,
Yes.
and whether they are blood related or not, and becoming references,
Yes.
right? Like I think that's where you're saying you grew up in an environment of safety where you had references, and probably mentors were an extension of that, and you were able to ask for mentors that were all the way in through your life. I'd like to dig into that concept of references, mentors, and sponsors. How was it in your life? What role did they play? How did you ask for them? And then we can transition onto a little deeper on what does it mean to be a mentor? What does it mean to be a sponsor? And how do you ask for them? How do you prepare for, having a mentor and being mentored properly?
Sure. Well, again, if I go back to this theme of family, it really started there, where it was my dad and my sister and my mom. I always had this sort of space where I could ask these kinds of questions. Now, my parents didn't grow up in corporations, and so they didn't have that experience necessarily, but education was very important. They made sure that there were those connections. And my sister's 13 years older than me, and so she was the first in our family to go to university. And so she was the one who was able to really share some of her learnings 13 years ahead of me and connect me with her friends. And it was actually through that, again, that broader community, one of her friends connected me to my very first corporate jobs at Intel, where she said, go in, these are the things you want to do to prepare, even down to this is the outfit you want to wear, like all of those small nuances that, I may not necessarily would have received, but it was somebody that was helping me think through it. And so when I think about mentors, it starts there. But as I think about it from more of a, I guess, bring it to today, my role today, mentors are very much about who do you need in that moment. So for me, I have right now, if you know about Salesforce, it's all things AI right now. Well, AI, technology from that perspective is not something I've spent a lot of time on. And so I've been finding mentors for myself that can help teach me the technology. I have other mentors that are helping me navigate maybe specific situations. When I was new in this job, finding mentors who are experts in DE&I that could be my partners or personal board of directors that can help me be successful in this role. And then when I think of the sponsors in my career, these are the folks, and I always think the best sponsor is somebody that's 2 levels above you. Because this is somebody that's in the room when decisions like promotions or assignments are being made. And I say 2 levels because at 2 levels, they can look across the organization. You have people who can see not just in your narrow organization, but across maybe a broader segment. And those are the folks that in my career have helped me find new opportunities, whether it was an international assignment or moving out of HR into finance or out of finance into compliance and ethics. It was those sponsors who were able to see those next jobs and those next opportunities who would say things to me like, you get on well with the lawyers. How about you go try a hand in compliance and ethics? And it was not something I'd spent any time in. And so it was those new opportunities that came through those sponsors and just that openness of connecting with people that helped.
I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the mentors.
Sure.
Because being a little selfish, I think I've messed up many of my mentorship relationships by like not knowing how to start that relationship or how to keep the relationship. So can you tell us, like, how do you reach out to somebody that you want that person to be your mentor? How do you manage the ongoing relationship? Do you ever break up with them because they're no longer like useful? I don't want to say that, but like.
So I think the first thing is, I think every mentor I've met through somebody else. And I think that's one of the interesting things that's really important, whether you're early career, mid-career, or even towards the end of your career. I think making sure you're investing in your network. Who are the people that, again, I always try to think of what's the job I want 2 jobs from now, or what's the work I need to do in the next quarter or 2, and where are those resources? Where are those people that I can help or can help me? And so, because to me, mentorship is a mutual relationship. And so I think being thoughtful about where and how you connect with people has been really important. And so I think you can do it through formal programs, and we definitely have those where you can fill out skills sheets, and we have algorithms that match people and can bring them together. And then to your point, sometimes people click and sometimes we don't. And so we try to set up in a way that, if it's not a relationship that clicks, everybody can gracefully walk away. It's great. But if it clicks, then it's somebody that, again, you want to keep up that relationship with. But I think the best ones are the mentors that I've met through others or through my networks or showing up at activities where I can seek people out, do my homework ahead of time and find the people that I want to meet. And then to your point about how do you keep up the relationships, for me, it's a couple of different ways. I have some mentors where we send each other articles. We might not talk on a regular basis, but we want to keep the relationship warm. And so I know what their interests are. And so I might send an article that says, oh, I know you're doing the latest research on this topic. Let me send you something I just saw in this media article or that. And then there's others where maybe it's somebody I'm going into town. Okay, I'm traveling. Hey, how's it going? We haven't connected in a couple of quarters. I'm going to be in town. Let's find a moment to connect. And then I would say on the more formal side, where I really like the AI, I'll use that one as an example because it's very present, is there's some specific learnings I want to gain. And then there's some things that I want to make sure from an equality perspective, I'm contributing to the AI story around inclusion and, our battle against bias. And so in that case, there's very specific objectives, very specific conversations, and very specific partners that I'm meeting with on a regular basis. So I guess all of that to say it's a very wide gamut. And the most important thing as an individual is to know what you want out of it and to do the homework and preparation.
Yeah. I have further questions on this one because I think that a lot of what I hear, there's the rules of the game that you don't know what you don't know. And so in order to create a plan so that you can ask a mentor to guide you into certain things, you should know what you want. And sometimes we don't even know that. And there's that piece, I think that, it would be interesting just to break down a bit more. So there are rules of the game that we should know about so that we can play the game. What are the things that we could do or that you have done to see what you don't know? Right. And to understand rules that you don't even know that they exist?
Yeah, I can use it. Maybe I can share an example of a couple of things that happened to me. So I was at a company and I was doing my first presentation to senior leadership. And I think, as we get more senior and at every level, there's, to your point, there's all these unwritten rules. And I was going into an environment where it wasn't going to be in the office. It was going to be at a resort. I was going to be presenting for about 30 minutes. But what I didn't know was that this is a very casual time when the leaders get together. There was we are a West Coast company, but this was a meeting that was going to be on the East Coast. And, and so there was these nuances about style, approach, even down to the kinds of shoes that I wore. And the reason I say that is because the leader at the time, she was a sponsor of mine and a mentor. And what she said to me is, she said, Lori, this is going to be a very odd thing to say, but what are you going to wear? And at first I was a little taken aback. I was like, why is she asking me what I'm going to wear? Like, is she judging me? Like, do I not look professional? And I think she could see the look on my face. She said, no. What you can't be is all San Francisco. We're going to a different part of the country. The culture, the norms are slightly different. We're in resort wear. You need to figure out, think Hamptons, think Cape Cod, think very casual. Okay, I'm a Cali gal. I kind of looked at her and went, okay, I'm not sure I know exactly what you mean. And she said, come around. Let's look on the internet. And so we did. This was probably, 15 years ago, but we sort of went around, we looked at her laptop and so we go through this whole thing. We talk about, what I'm going to do. And then she said to me, the reason I'm doing this is because you're walking into a room of mostly men. And she said, and I've seen other women show up and they show up in their San Francisco suits and heels. And she said, we're at the beach and they're all going to be in shorts and polo shirts. And she said, and I've seen, women walk in and they're trying to walk in the beach and the sand with their heels and they're, and everybody's more distracted by what they're wearing than what they're saying. And she said, I want them to hear what you have to say. So let's just get this part out of the way. And I would say the theme of the story is they tell you when there are things that can distract from your message that you don't even know about. And in this case, it was the casual nature of the meeting versus the formality that this company was known for. And so it was sort of flipping that script of, I know normally you show up in a suit, but this is a place where you have permission to show up differently. And I don't want you to go status quo and have that, not set you up for success. And so I think for me, the place when these conversations happen, when you have a trusted relationship. And so for me, it's how do you build that trusted relationship is where you start to get some of these unwritten rules and people willing to share with you, because talking to somebody about what they're wearing can also, again, like I said, it can be a little jarring if it's not somebody that there's mutual trust. And so I think in these relationships, the point is to make sure you have that mutual trust, because that's when you start to get those great nuggets of the unwritten rules.
And it's almost like, it's like you want to ask a question, but you don't know which question to ask, right?
That's right.
Like you would have never set up an agenda for that sponsor, have a call with the sponsor and ask the sponsor, what should I wear? So it's that relationship and that maybe like just talking about anything, and then suddenly you're talking about this event, and then she tells you that. And at least what we were talking about with Ileana in our previous recording is that we want the next generation to get to where we are in half the time.
Yes.
But the only way that can happen is if they learn from us and not from doing. Because if you don't have the mentor, then the way that you, or the sponsor, the way that you would have learned that, it's by going, messing up the first time, and then the second time you would have been like, okay, this time I have my Hamptons clothing.
Yes,
so then
exactly.
I think it's important to put the time on building those relationships and not having them be so transactional that you think you have all the questions. Because if you don't know what to ask, you're not going to get the answer.
Yeah, and I think the important part of the trust is being willing, coming prepared, but also being vulnerable. So one of the things that I've done, and I learned early in my career, is what else do I need to know to be prepared is a question I always ask. Or, help me understand what other successful presenters have done. Can you give me feedback? You've seen me present before. I'm presenting to a new audience. Are there things that I do that you think will resonate best with this audience, or things that I do that won't? And so I think also showing up as a mentee or as a sponsee with an attitude of openness and willingness to learn, I think that's created the conditions by which people felt more comfortable sharing some of that feedback. And so I think that's sometimes we want to come up so buttoned up and so formal. Our mentors and sponsors sometimes don't want to crush us or don't want to tell us something that maybe they feel is going to break our confidence. And so it's finding ways to ask those questions of those mentors and sponsors so that they know you're open.
Yeah.
And that because they want to help you. Everybody wants to help when they volunteer to be a sponsor or a mentor, or when you're building those relationships. And so I always think about, how do I make it easy for them to help me? And how do I create those conditions for us to build that trust?
You have mentioned something, you haven't used the word, but it's a hot word lately, the reverse mentorship. And you're basically saying also mentorship goes both ways.
Yes.
Now people say, a CEO has to have a young mentor to tell them how to use social media or how to think about AI. You didn't use the words, but I think you were a pioneer in the reverse mentorship. You should have coined the word.
We would like to know more about your role as diversity, equity, and inclusion within one of the largest tech companies in the world. How is it? What are the programs that work? Like what are the objectives? And just like driving the mentorship and the sponsorship program, are those kind of like the best practices on making sure that people get, feel integrated, have a sense of belonging? A little bit just like to close down the loop of mentorship and sponsorship within corporations. How do you do it from your perspective as a leader of Salesforce?
Sure. So I think it's part of it is understanding what goals you're trying to achieve, right? Because I think mentorship and sponsorship are tools or approaches, but it depends on what you as the individual are looking for, and whether or not a mentorship or sponsorship or maybe another program is the right answer for you. And so what we try to do is leverage our data to say, what is the objective we're trying to meet here? And so if someone is trying to look for their next career opportunity, if we use that as an example, that's something that comes up for Latinas quite a lot in our organization. How do I navigate my career? So if I think about that goal of how do I navigate my career, we talk about two paths. So the mentorship path, we have a tool called Mentor Finder, where anybody in the company can sign up to be mentors, and anybody in the company can look for both mentors and mentees. And so that's something that anybody in the company can do. And we've got some technology that helps us do that. And then we have specialized programs through our business resource groups and through our office where, again, we can do more formal matching depending on the goals that the individual has. Sponsorship, I want to talk about a little bit because I think that's something that it's taken us a little while to unpack. How do we set up a framework? Again, how do we create those conditions for sponsorship in a company? Because it's a really special relationship. And to your points earlier, it can be one that it's hard to figure it out, right? Because somebody as a sponsor, you're also putting your political capital on the table. You're using your leverage, your credibility. And so I also think sometimes people are quite reticent to be sponsors until they really know the person. Yeah. And so what we've done is we have a program called Amplify, if I use this as one example. And what we've tried to do is figure out what are all the different dimensions of sponsorship. And so it was, how do you find the right matches? And so we were very intentional about creating a cohort. This last cohort we had is women of color. We then figured out, okay, what are their goals? So which departments do they want to move to? Are there leaders that they want to connect with? And then we went out and actually asked and invited a very specific cohort of sponsors to join this program. And so we had an amazing team of sponsors, amazing team of sponsees, and then we created a program by which we had different opportunities for them to work together. Because the important thing about being a sponsor is, again, before you're sort of moving forward and recommending or talking about someone, you want to see them in action. Yeah. And so this program created an opportunity for them to actually work together on a project that our CEO team put together for them. And so it created, again, this environment. And then also what was really important was engaging their managers. Yeah. Because we want to make sure their managers know where they want their career so that the managers and the sponsors can work together to help people's careers move forward. So that's just a small example of a way that we can pull it together
I've
formally.
never heard of a sponsorship, like structured sponsorship program, because as you said, it's like you're putting your capital, your credibility when you, it's not like I'm giving you a recommendation as a mentor. It's more like I'm taking you with me in my own growth. So that's, I think in Salesforce, you guys are doing very innovative things.
Oh, thank you.
At least from what when I was doing research on you, I was like, oh, everyone should be doing these things.
Yeah, anyway. We've tried to be thoughtful and learn. I think that's the key. And the role of the manager, the role of the sponsor, the role of the employee, right? You own your own employability as an employee as well. Yeah. And I think the best scenarios is when you have those folks working together towards that common career goal that the person has designed or is thinking through for themselves.
And this Salesforce just doing it because they want to be good people, good citizens of the world, or what is the business equation for all of this?
Well, I think for us at Salesforce, so equality is part of our DNA. And what I would say is we're very unique in that it's DE&I for us is not a program that sits on the side. It's equality is a value of the company. It's one of our core values. And so you see it permeated throughout the company. And what I think of my office is we figure out where and how do we accelerate it? You know, where are the ways that we can bring greater equity? How do we leverage our data to better understand ways we can increase representation, retention, experience? Our strategy really cuts across. We want to make sure that we're thinking about representation, which in tech is very challenging history, and we want to make sure that we're being intentional in how we move it forward. So we have goals that we tie to executive compensation as an example as it relates to representation. But then we want to make sure that we think about experience. And I think experience is the hardest thing to tackle in a corporation because it's so individual. And especially if you're a first or an only, it's really difficult to create that inclusive environment. And so we try to be really thoughtful about are there other ways we can create that inclusion and that safety for our teams? And I think that's something that is a perpetual way that we continue to focus. And then it's about how do we, I believe that every person every day can decide whether or not they're creating an inclusive environment. It doesn't have to be leaders. It doesn't have to be, you and me. If I'm, your manager, I'm the only one who can create an inclusive environment. It's everybody that we work with. And so one of the things that we do to measure this, again, from a company perspective, is we know there's a very close tie between our most inclusive teams and performance. And so we have an inclusion index that we put into our employee survey twice a year. And we then measure that against performance. And so, for example, we know our most inclusive teams in our sales organization have 12% better sales attainment. And who doesn't want better sales attainment? And so, at Salesforce, we talk about values drive value. And this is another way where through our volunteer time off, through our employee resource groups, through all of these different, again, angles, we can then create the experiences that, really drive us to be that most inclusive company, which ultimately helps our business be more successful. We also see this as a great opportunity where we can lock arms and go together with our partners and our customers as we're all trying to make a difference in their communities.
I think it's very important for you to be like saying this message and telling everyone, and I'm going to make it my own to be telling everyone, because not every company has the resources of Salesforce to track it. And I have found that some executives think, oh, that only works in big companies. In smaller companies, the performance is not better. Like it's in big companies, the Kool-Aid, you drink the Kool-Aid and you think that inclusion drives results. And we should all use your data to say, it's going to work in tech, but it's going to work in retail, it's going to work in consumer goods. And not everybody will have the budget to go and measure and have data-driven decisions. But if you spread the message, if we spread the message, then everybody can use the same insights. So thank you.
Of course. And it's not perfect. No company is perfect, but what we try to do is have that beginner's mind so that we're continuing to learn and figure out how to adapt to your exact point. What might work for one company might not work for another, but there may be certain elements or framing. And so things like our inclusion index, we share.
Yeah.
We say, these are the 6 core questions that are important to us. Those might work for you, or to your point, maybe there's something else that you would focus on based on, your business and your priorities. And again, how you measure performance looks different in an engineering organization than it might look in a sales organization. And so again, being able to just be open and have those conversations, you don't have to be an expert. That's really just knowing your business and knowing what's important to you.
I have 20 follow-up questions of this, but look, I think that what is important to know, and I would love to hear whether that's true for you, is that you have to go and take the big bet, because what you're saying is you cannot just think that you have a department that can do 2 little lip service things and it's going to drive results.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me that what you said is a 360 that is coming top down, that is embraced all across, that has bonus attached to it, that has performance attached to it, that has, results measurement attached to it. So at the end of the day, I think that if you're going to do it, you just have to do it properly to get the results that you're having. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's you have to think about the whole system. That's really, you can't really solve it through one program. I think of programs help us accelerate in certain areas where maybe we want to drive retention or we want to drive hiring, or, programs have a purpose. But I think to really have the impact, they can't be the only thing that you do. You have to look at your whole system. And that's some of the most difficult work. But when you start to see it clicking and your managers understanding and your sponsors and you see the system together, it really moves the work forward. And I think this is a body of work we're always 5 steps forward, 2 steps back, 5 steps forward, 2 steps back. And so I think when you think about it from a systemic point of view, it allows you to be more agile and to make those pivots. And for me, I believe it allows us to innovate. There isn't one way to solve this. Mm-hmm. It's, how do you do that deep listening with your employees? What do they really need? And then how do you bring that into a user human-centered design so that you're designing for a more inclusive environment versus, for one set of lived experiences versus another. You really have to think about that from a more holistic point of view. And I think you have to think about it in a number of different ways. So we have formal programs. We have something called the Warm Line, which is specifically to our Black, Latinx, Indigenous, LGBTQ+, and women of all races community based here in the U.S. And this is a program that we had heard about from another company, and then we customized for us. How is this going to help us do more organized, deep listening, I'll call it. And it was really that understanding of we don't know every community in a deep enough way. And this was a formal way for us to both advocate and support the needs, but also on the flip side, better understand. And so we know for Latinas, the most important topics that come up are around career navigation, which we were talking about earlier, that relationship. How do you build that trusted relationship with your manager? Mm-hmm. When I think about this work, it's not about fixing the Latinas, like, oh, let's have a program that fixes the Latinas. It's actually about, no, how do we fix the system? Right? How do we, have that partnership with the managers and the employees so that, again, back to that two-way street. And so how do we better understand that? And then the third piece is that experience. How do we create that experience and, again, those conditions that allow people to be more innovative, to bring their experiences that they've had both in their careers and through their communities. And, I would say with the Latina community, it's been this very strong connection to community and family. Which is so close to so many of the Salesforce values around our volunteer time off. This is something that we pay our employees, over a week's time off every year to volunteer in the community. And this is something that we hear from many of our Latinas that it's really important to them. This allows them to give back. It's integrated into our jobs and into our work. And it's a way that both they can feel connected to their communities, and it's a way that they can get connected to their teams and their managers. And so there's, small little things along the way that help create this better understanding of who we are. It also helps expose the team to different cultures and communities through the volunteer experience. And so I think that's another way that you can share your community also back with your team.
I feel like all your peers, any other chief equity officer in a different company must be like kicking themselves. Why don't I work in Salesforce? Because I feel like...
You're so kind.
Well, because I feel like you work in a company that, just like Claudia was saying, it's not like one program here, or let's add it as the 6th value of the company, but it's not really permeating. So we have a lot to learn from you. I want to ask you specifically about recruiting and promoting Latinas. Mm-hmm. What do you think are specific things and unique things that companies should be doing to recruit Latina talent and to promote them and create the environment for them to thrive, besides giving opportunities to stay connected with their community?
Well, I think part of the work, especially from recruiting, is how do you meet people where they are? Right? How do you go to the spaces where Latinas are and make sure that you're getting to know people and understanding? And so whether it's through our university programs or through partnerships, how do we make sure that we really understand and are connected to the places where Latinas are? I think it's, yes, there may be ways that they come to Salesforce, but we also want to make sure at that sort of top of the funnel that if we want to drive that application volume, we really need to make sure that Latinas know who we are, what we stand for, and why this would be a great place for them. And so again, it's how do we create those conditions by which they can make connections? And one of programs that I'm most excited about and is one of our most successful programs on the recruiting side is we have a group called Insiders. And Insiders basically means that when you're in the interview process, you can talk to somebody inside the company that has a common profile to you. So if I'm a Latina and I'm interviewing for a job at Salesforce, and maybe I'm part of a 2-parent working family, and I want to understand, well, how are other Latinas in the company navigating a sales role or a technology role? I can actually go on to an application and I can search through people inside the company that have volunteered, Latinas, to be insiders. And in my interview process, I can actually have a conversation with them. And the point of that conversation is, what you see is what you get. And so it's meant to be a very candid conversation, the good, bad, and the ugly of, the challenges, the exciting things, the opportunities. And we find that when we make offers to candidates that have gone through the Insider program, they accept our offers 100% of the time. And so it's a tremendously, just that opportunity to really get that insight has been so valuable to our candidates.
Incredible.
And then we also find that it gives the person a connection when they start, because now they know somebody before they even start at the company. So it helps ease that connection as well. And so that's just one small example of one that, just again, helps people really understand what is it going to be to me inside this company before I show up there.
So you just told us how to recruit Latinas.
Yes.
But I want you to tell us why to recruit Latinas. Because
of course.
Claudia and I have been talking a lot about flipping the script.
Yes.
About the characteristics that Latinas have that may be seen with one side of the coin, and if we show the other side of the coin, the same characteristic, it's actually a positive one. So why should companies recruit Latinas? What are the characteristics associated with Latinas that are good for business?
And if I may ask, since you are a Latina.
Yes.
And we're very proud to have an incredible trailblazer like you leading DEI for one of the most important tech companies. So you're a role model and inspiration for us and for many.
Oh, thank you.
How do you as a Latina, looking at the data of Latinos, what have you learned about the cultural nuances? What's the playbook that you inside of the company have for Latinos? Being you one probably is closer to you in a more emotional way, but like overall.
Yeah. So I think for me, a couple of things that come to mind is, you hear a lot of the stereotypes of, big, emotional, a lot.
Yes. Have you heard that? Loud.
A lot.
This is new to me.
And one of the things I would say is that in my role, well, you couldn't find me in the internet before I had this role. I think what I've always brought, if I use myself as an example, is this conviction to the role of we're loud for a reason because we have conviction and we believe in what we stand for. We know who we are. And I do believe that, that what other people might perceive as sort of big and loud, I look at as we've got courage, we've got conviction, and a lot of times we can be willing to speak up when others aren't. And so sometimes I know there's other things in our culture that may conflict with that, where, the respect for authority or maybe a deference. But one of the things that I feel has been very steady is this notion of conviction. And I think it's, and being willing to just say it. And I've seen that a lot. And I think it's a really valuable trait. I also think this notion of inclusion from the point of view of community and connection. When I walk into a room of Latinas, there's always this warmth that comes through. And I think part of it is we come from so many different diverse cultures, but we all love to find ways to be together. And I think that this is an important, not losing that when we move into a corporate environment is really, really important. Finding ways to seek each other out and support the diversity of our culture, I think is really important and something that I think we can all bring to the table.
Yeah.
And do you have, I think that it is very important that not only we know it, that we can transform and flip the script from loud to conviction. I love that. But do your peers and managers have to know it? Do you educate all your managers and peers of Latinos so that they know that that loudness actually, if you flip it, could be conviction? Or is that something that, is not yet done at the organizational level as a program?
So what I would say is
Ally training.
Yeah, well, funny story. It's I've worked at places that I would say were more formal in nature, industries that were more formal in nature, and I would say there I felt like I had to dial down and felt a little less. It was harder, to do that code switching and navigate. And I was in a particular industry for almost 10 years, and it wasn't until I came to Salesforce I actually realized how much I had dialed down and conformed. When I got to Salesforce, we're kind of a big personality kind of company. And so I do think we're actually a really fabulous fit for the Latinx community, because we are about, big and being out there and having conviction. And so I think there's a lot of values alignment between the Latinx community and Salesforce. And so when I first came, I felt like, okay, these are my people. Like this is a space where I can just show up and be me. I can wear the crazy tennis shoes, or I can wear the bright colors when I'm on stage. There was all of these things that I had realized other times in my career I wasn't even conscious of how much I was dialing that down until I came into an environment where I didn't have to anymore.
And what do you think is the impact, even like the business impact of having your team dialing down who they are? Can you tell us what? Is it bad? Is it good? Should people do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that whole notion of the dialing down and code switch. I think, companies don't get the full advantage of who you are when you feel like you need to do that. And so I think, when you're in a company where you're open and, look, we're all in different environments and, we all have to navigate. If you're in a meeting with the board of directors or with investors, you may show up a little differently than, if I'm going and doing a town hall with the intern team or Future Force team. And so I think in a professional environment, you always have to know kind of who your audience is and how you show up. And so I think that's the baseline. But then I think depending on the company culture, you either have an environment where people can bring who they are and show up with the fullness of who they are, or you can't. And I think each of us, as we're looking at companies and thinking about where we want to work, I think that's something you test for in the interview process. And I think it's something that's really important to find. It took me a long time in my career to figure out, I need values alignment. Wherever I go, I need to make sure where I'm going, I'm not going to have to dial down, or I'm not going to have to show up differently.
I need to know more about that. So specifically, let's practice.
Okay.
This is your interview. I'm interviewing.
Okay, all right.
You're interviewing for a job with me. How would you test if our values align? I'm your potential future boss. Hello, Lori.
Hola, Lori.
Hola, Lori.
Well,
you're a little late, but it's okay.
I think part of it is, I would say sort of how you're greeted. Are people smiling at you? Are they engaging with you? Are they interested? These are things. Are they interested in me, the human, not just me, the employee? And so I think
Also, are there senior Latinas in your staff?
Yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, that's, of course, an important one, for sure. And I think just yes, there's always going to be a level of formality in an interview, but I don't know, there's something about, do people feel like they can bring their humanity to the table? And if you can't feel that in an interview, I'm not sure you're going to feel it in the job. And so for me, my family obviously started to hear me during COVID. I would be working from home, and they'd say, "It sounds like you're laughing all day long." And I said, because I have to have joy and fun in my job. And so whether I'm in an interview, that's how I show up. And so I think for me, if I was talking to somebody, my future employer, are they asking me questions about, and of course you have to be careful in interviews, but about me?
Yeah.
Do they care about who I am? Do they care about my community? Are they asking questions of curiosity? Or do I get the impression that they have a very specific set of what's right or what's wrong in a certain area? Are they leaving room for innovation? And I think it sounds like very high level topics, but there's a lot of nuances that can happen in an interview that kind of show you whether or not someone's going to be open or whether or not they're going to be more rigid. And I think for me as a Latina, I need that space to be innovative, to push the envelope, to really think about how we can drive things in a much bigger way. I guess that's how my Latinidad shows up in who I am.
Do you think that, I mean, like, this is the first time we're talking about this, but I do think that checking whether they're interested and curiosity, but shall Latinas ask, like, what is this, what are the values that you have so that you can see whether they align to yours? Do you have senior Latinas? What is this environment for Latinas specifically? I like how we ask some of those very specific questions about, like, like, is this environment inclusive for Hispanics?
That's right. I think people should
I don't think that we ever ask that.
I've never asked
I think
that.
that we never even say we're Latinos because we're scared of actually coming with our identity forward. And I think that's where, do you think that those are good questions to start with?
I do. And in ways that you can ask if you're feeling less comfortable are, tell me about how you bring your personal values to work.
Yeah.
I see Salesforce as a very, values-driven company.
Yeah.
How does that show up day to day for you as a leader in the organization? Is a great way to ask that question.
When you're interviewing for a job, you're also interviewing them.
That's
so
right.
It's totally fine. Like, it's if they don't like the question, that's your answer. That's not the place for you.
Well, exactly. And another question it's that I think is really important is, like, if it's important to you, what does the company stand for, or what does that manager stand for? I think it's okay to ask that question. Some things that are really important to me are, teamwork, innovation, equality, inclusion.
Yeah.
As a manager, what values are important to you and how do you bring them to your team? That could be a really, again, it's not it doesn't feel, hopefully that's a way that people can ask the question and not feel like they're being, awkward or creating an uncomfortable scenario in an interview. I think everybody's looking for companies that align with their values. And so that can be a way. And you can decide whether or not you want to attribute it to your Latina background or not. I think that's up to each individual's personal preference. I think for us, these are the kinds of questions that our insiders get all the time, because I do think, in particular, if they don't see a Latina in their interview chain, it allows them a way to go get the answers that they might not feel comfortable seeking through the actual interview. And we don't get notes from the insiders or anything. It is literally meant to be a safe space for those kinds of questions to be asked.
I want to go deeper into the identity piece, and I want to go back to my favorite subject, which is Lori. So let's go there. You've mentioned how yourself, you had to dial down. We also have heard from, like our guests, and we hope that we can bring a wide perspective.
Yes.
The community is so diverse. We're everything. We can be, Native American, Afro, Latinos, part of LGBTQ, and then there's some identity issue that a lot of people are feeling about, like, am I fluent enough in English to be American? Am I fluent enough in Spanish to feel Latina? Do I claim the Latinidad even if I can't? Do I feel rejected in one or the other, as opposed to being able to be everything? And can you talk about that in your own experience?
Sure.
And how has that been part of your corporate life as a person, as Lori, but also Lori now as seeing, like, overseeing so many people and talent?
Yeah, it's a complicated one, I'll say. I know for myself, so I don't speak Spanish. And so it's one of those things where there's always a little bit of insecurity, even at my level today. There's always a little bit of insecurity of, oh my gosh, am I enough? Am I representing? How are people going to feel if they, start to speak to me in Spanish. And then I say, oh, un poquito de español, that's it. That's all I could do. Yeah. And so there's always this sort of moment or, the dreaded question of, where are you from? And then I say things like, well, I'm from San Jose, California. And you get kind of the cocked look of like, no, but where are you really from? And, I sit there and let that person be awkward rather than me be awkward, I've learned. And it's sort of, there's all of these little things that happen in your career of stereotypes and expectations that people have for you. And I think they're outside the community and in the community. I mean, exactly what you said. I mean, I've definitely walked into spaces where everybody may be speaking Spanish, or maybe they're sharing a personal story. And I feel like, okay, I don't really have that type of story. I have my own story, but then you start judging your own story. And it's an awkward feeling to feel like you have to judge your own story. And I would say I didn't share my story for many years because I didn't really know what to say, because I didn't feel like what I would share was going to be what people expected of me. And so I just sort of conformed and did what I needed to do. It was sort of, and I don't think I even realized it in a very conscious way until I actually had a Latino leader. And he said to me, Lori, I want you to get involved in our employee resource group. And this is probably 15 years into my career at this point. And I said, oh, no, I've never really gotten involved. Like, my experience isn't the same. And so we sort of went through these things, and he said, well, I've got a great story. I came, on a boat from Cuba. Like, I'll cover that part. But I think there's a lot of people just like you that nobody ever hears that story, and they're not showing up because there's no one like you telling that story. And he said, why don't we go together? We'll go to different sites together, meet groups of Latinos across, Latinx employees across. And I bet between us, we'll hit a wider mark than if just you went or just I went. And that was my first experience, sort of leaning in. And I did realize that there were a lot of people whose experience was more similar to mine, sort of growing up in a generation of assimilation, or just, again, so many generations had passed. Some things were kept and some things were lost. And I think I didn't appreciate the value of sharing that until I had a leader that was willing to lock arms with me and help me feel less secure about that, or less insecure about it, to be honest. And so it's definitely been a journey personally, as well as I think in companies, we also have to be very careful not to stereotype or make assumptions or, ask the dreaded question in a way that makes people uncomfortable, versus you can ask that question in a way that makes people feel very welcome and very excited about where you're from. And you can ask it in a way that makes people really uncomfortable. And I think, having that trusted relationship and that curiosity, then we want to share ourselves and who we are. And so, again, I think there's ways to do that that creates that warmth and connection.
I think we're all going through our own process of embracing our Latinidad. I know, Claudia, when you moved to the U.S., you also found out you were Latina. In my case, I remember,
exactly.
The CMO at Walmart, he was my manager, and he calls me one day, literally just to ask me, hey, aren't you Latina? And I was like, why? Because I'm looking at our numbers, and I don't see you. You didn't mark that you were Latina when you were hired, so they weren't counting me as a Latina, and I didn't identify myself as Latina because I always thought Latinos are born in the U.S. to Latin American parents. So I thought, I'm a foreigner, I'm not a Latina. And so then he changed the way that I was categorized, and they invited me to be an executive sponsor of the Latinx ARG. And one of the main problems we had as a Latinx employee resource was that we didn't know who were Latinos because people didn't identify themselves as Latinos. So we're like, are there 100 or 200 in this office? Nobody knows.
Yeah. So that is changing. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's those artificial rules, right, and barriers that we create that actually I think, take away our ability to be a stronger community together. We sort of have these artificial rules where really it's about, oh no, that we can come together with so many things we have in common and that we can learn from each other. I wish we could kind of take away some of those barriers sometimes.
And I think that we are in a very special moment. That's why it's so important that we all lean in.
Yes.
The way that we're doing this podcast, the way that you're driving Salesforce, it is because our identity is being reformed, the way that history has, has shaped the way in which Mexico in the 20s, had a new identity giving birth with a muralist commissioned by President Obregón and Vasconcelos to say, we don't have to admire the Spanish looking, we can admire the worker look for Mexico. I think that Latinos are going through this change according to the Hispanic sentiment study that we just released. There's an incredible trend to Latinidad. There's an incredible trend to understanding that 30% of Hispanics today do not speak Spanish. So it's, you're part of a larger group in the country that are right now saying wait, but that doesn't define my identity or my Latinidad. I can still love my food, my culture, my values, and be Latina equally if I don't speak the language. But there's a trend to Latinidad. There's a trend to more. And I think that companies have an incredible opportunity of learning, of being curious, of leaning in to get those cultural nuances. And we as Latinos, we have to know that those values are not a con for our career, but are a pro if we're able to flip the script, if we're able to see how this transition between loud means conviction.
Right, yeah.
What other things do you think that we should flip the script on values?
Yeah, I think part of it is how do we embrace each other? I think, to your point earlier about if we're all moving in this direction towards our Latinidad, how do we learn from each other, right? Let's have an open conversation because I think there's a lot of different ways we show our identity, music, food, culture, values, in some cases, religion. There's so many different dynamics. And I think we don't spend enough time really leaning in and learning. One of the things that I think is really important to me personally, and I've seen in our community, is around family and community. And I think this is one of those things where it's, how do you flip the script on that? You can be some of our best leaders, some of our greatest team leaders bring that community, bring that connection, bring that curiosity to the company in a way that allows people to feel like they can be themselves in the environment. And I think the more we also feel comfortable sharing that with our allies and with other folks that don't look like us, you start to create that broader environment. So I think community and family is a really important one. And I think it teaches us a lot about collaboration and about really driving and leading great teams. I think the other piece is, really understanding, we talked a little bit earlier about sort of this notion of deference to authority. And I think this is a space where, and we're so grateful for the opportunity. And so I do think for companies, there is this lack of understanding that when Latinos come into the workforce, many of us do feel grateful. We are excited to be there. We can be the most loyal employees to our leaders and to our companies. And what I want companies to know is don't take advantage of that. Help those leaders succeed and find those internal career opportunities. And I think for us is we have to make sure we're willing to use our voice, even when it feels a little counterculture. And then I think for our leaders, how do you, again, create those conditions for your employees to say, okay, I know there's this cultural nuance. How do I help my employee? And again, not that we need to be saved, but I do think there's a mutual two-way street of managers being curious. And then for us, how do we step into our own employability? And we can still be grateful and excited to be in our companies. We shouldn't be embarrassed by that. But I also think companies should understand there may be that cultural nuance. And how do we help our Latina leaders really move through so that becomes a very positive aspect to that connection with that leader?
Amazing.
I love it. Okay. Two last questions. The
Okay.
first one is, if you could go back in time and give yourself advice, maybe when you were 25,
Yes.
30 years old, what would you tell yourself to make your career either go faster or go better or enjoy it more? Any advice?
I would say one of the things I've learned is careers are long. And I've learned that there's times when I've leaned into my career and times where I've leaned back. And the times where I've leaned back have generally been related to family. Whether it was when I had my children or when, I was supporting my extended family, and it didn't ruin my career. And I think sometimes when you're young, you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't take my parental leave, or I'm only going to take a shorter time than I'm granted. And I think for me, what I've realized is nobody remembers if you were out for 6 weeks or 6 months, because careers are long. And I think sometimes the story we tell ourselves is, oh my gosh, I'm gonna take back my career. Or I've had opportunities. I mentioned earlier, I had an opportunity to live overseas in Europe. And I had to make a career decision to leave that company because my family, my boys were going into high school and they really wanted to come back home. And so I could take a career opportunity that led me to another assignment, to another part of the country, or I could find a new job and come back home. And I knew it was going to be a harder road to find another company, another job. But it was really important for me to have that conversation and support my children in that scenario. And so I took a lateral move. But here's the funny part of the story. That move landed me at Salesforce.
No, this is great.
And I could not have imagined where my career has gone from taking that first leap that I thought, oh my gosh, this is a lateral move. I'm kind of, pay and things that were really important weren't going backwards, but certainly my scope and my remit, starting over at a new company, those things I my old self would have thought, oh my gosh, you're going to ruin your career.
Yes.
My self 5 years ago was like, well, I know I'm an amazing leader. I'm going to make it work however it works. And if it doesn't work there, I'll find another place. And so it was a different kind of confidence going into the scenario to say, my family is important. I know that about myself. I'm going to make this choice. And wow, what an amazing ride it has been 5 years later. I never would have guessed it. From that moment, I thought I was stepping back in my career. So
I love that you're playing with the right script. You are playing with the script of a great leader that has opportunities and everything will be lining up.
It'll sort itself out.
It sorts itself out, and careers are long. That's a good one. So who else do you think that has those experiences, those nuggets of information that we should bring to the podcast so that our listeners can do it in half the time?
Oh, my goodness. So many amazing leaders. I think you all know our CEO of our Slack business, Lidiane Jones. She is a phenomenal leader, a technologist who's worked for some amazing organizations. And wow, is she breaking down doors and driving innovation in our Slack business. I would love for you to connect with her if you could at some point. Her. She's absolutely phenomenal.
And she's leading a la Latina.
Yes.
Latina style, not denying the self and just like breaking it and making it. I think that's an amazing.
Thank you.
This has been amazing.
I learned so much from you. I'm inspired and I'm empowered and I'm going to go and use all your playbook.
Lori Castillo Martinez from Salesforce.
Leading a la Latina.
A la Latina.